Welcome back to the California Conversation. I'm Tess Abraham. Free speech has been at the forefront of the political conversation for the past several weeks. We saw it really emerge with the assassination of Charlie Kirk, and then again in response to pulling Jimmy Kimmel's show off the air for a few days in response to some of the comments he made about the assassination. But even before these events, when it comes to freedom of speech or censorship, this has been an ongoing discussion. Now, our governor, Gavin Newsom, has once again placed himself in the center of attention when it comes to this topic, even tweeting that Donald Trump is dismantling the First Amendment in real time. So he claims that the Trump administration is one of censorship and ultimately of tyranny. But what's more important than just what Gavin Newsom says about the subject is what he does about it. And how do we know what he does? Well, we look at policies, we look at bills, we look at the laws that are passed in our state to see how they actually affect the people that he governs and what he really thinks about subjects like these. So to that end, today we are looking at a very important bill that has passed through our legislature and has landed once again on our governor's desk for his approval or his veto. We're going to get into all of it today. But before we get started, make sure to like this video, subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell so that you stay up to date on all things California politics. And if you want more information regarding today's episode, sources used in compiling today's episode, then you should check out my corresponding article on my website, which is linked below. All right, so what is this bill that we need to talk about? Well, Senate Bill 771 was introduced back in April of this year, and it was introduced by Senator Henry Stern, who actually represents parts of Los Angeles and Ventura County. I feel like a lot of the bills that I cover come from senators or assembly members who represent areas that I live in. It's so interesting that the controversial bills come out of LA, but that's beside the point. What exactly does this bill do? The purpose of this bill is to hold large social media companies liable if their platforms, so specifically their algorithms, are tied to civil rights violations. Let's break that down. First, we need to define large social media companies. So this is referring to platforms that have over $100 million or more in annual revenue. What it's going to do is it's going to say that if an algorithm on the platform relays or promotes content that leads to civil rights violations, which would be some sort of discrimination based on a protected class, then not only is the person who posted the content able to be held liable, but the actual social media channel that was used to post that content would also be held liable and would be subject to penalties and fines. Now, there's a lot on the line here because some of these fines are insane. The penalties go up to $1 million per instance. So that's not in total or in a cap. Every single time a company could be found guilty or liable of these instances, it could be fined up to $1 million. Or if it can be shown that it was just reckless, maybe not knowing or intentional, it could be less at $500,000. But that's still huge fines. So it's really important for us to understand what exactly this bill is outlawing and what it is holding companies accountable for. So when it comes to the language in the bill that says civil rights violations, what would those be? Examples are threats, intimidation, or harassment that would be based on protected characteristics like race or gender identity. So this is usually the type of speech that we hear about when we think of speech that is not protected, right? We have the First Amendment, which protects speech, and so we can say freedom of speech, but we know that there are certain types of speech that are illegal, types of speech that you can be liable for. And those are specifically ones that are incitement to violence, these things that I just mentioned, direct threats. If you're calling directly for someone to be physically or bodily harmed, then usually that speech is not going to be protected. So what this bill says is that it's not only the actual speech that would no longer be protected, but if it's a company that is promoting or somehow in the algorithm pushing out this hateful, harassing, or inciting language to its followers on the platform, that in itself is an action that can also incur a penalty. It is super important to understand right off the bat with this bill, the distinction that this bill is not speaking to the actual speech. So no one in the bill or nowhere in the bill is it trying to differentiate between the types of speech that are protected or are not. That has already been decided. We already have laws and rules around the type of speech that either can get you in trouble with the law or that is protected under the First Amendment. This bill is speaking to the companies that promote that type of speech or language. So it is now trying to make these social media companies liable, or it's trying to say that they have a responsibility or a part to play in when that speech is posted, who it is pushed out to, how it is promoted, things like that. So again, that's just a distinction that we need to make right off the bat. This is taking free speech exceptions and it's extending it out past just individuals who are saying the speech to also companies who platform the speech. You might be wondering, what was the catalyst for this? Why are lawmakers interested in proposing a bill like this? Well, they have cited directly in the bill text certain statistics or instances of harmful rhetoric or what they consider violent rhetoric that has been increasing on social media platforms. So we see that they cite a 31% increase in anti-immigrant hate crimes. They say that there's been a 400% rise in what they're calling anti-LGBTQ plus disinformation or harmful rhetoric online. I don't know what that means. I don't know how they're defining that. I don't know what disinformation would mean when it comes to the LGBTQ plus community, but that's a statistic they're citing. And then they have a 62% increase in anti-Islamic instances. So again, these are largely being described as harmful rhetoric. So who knows really how they're defining that or what that means. I'm not saying that these statistics are necessarily correct or proven, but that's what the lawmakers who are behind the bill or who are supporting it are using as fuel to be able to say, look, there's been an uptick in political violence. There's been an uptick in rhetoric online that's really inflammatory, especially towards certain groups. And so we want to try to decrease that on social media platforms. And so this is the way that we're going to do that. So a social media company under this bill could be held liable in two cases. And I want to be specific and take this directly from the bill text because I think it's important, again, for us to know directly what it's saying and really what it's doing. So we're not just making broad, sweeping claims. The first is that an algorithm could relay content to users that results in a violation of civil rights laws. So if some sort of rhetoric online posted on Instagram then leads directly to some sort of hate crime, then Instagram would be liable for promoting that type of content. It's all up in the air of what promoting even means, of what it means to relay that to users. Does the algorithm have to be pushing it out at a certain rate? All of that is really undefined, but the basic idea is that if a social media platform's algorithm allows users or promotes it to certain users based on their activity online, and it then results in some sort of crime being committed, now you can also come after the social media company. So that's the first instance. The second instance is if the social media company aids, abets, or conspires in such a violation. And so that would be a little bit more direct. That would be like if they are working with the person who is posting the content to make sure that certain violations are happening. Maybe they want certain people to gather and commit violence against a person or against a group of people. And so then they would be liable for that. It's a little more direct. So liability isn't just about hosting the speech on the platform, but it's also tied directly to how the algorithm is promoting or pushing out that content that would then lead to civil rights violations. What lawmakers are trying to argue is that social media companies know how their algorithms work, and so they have actual knowledge of what an algorithm will promote in certain instances. And so if, instead of taking the position or the view that an algorithm is really a black box and that we don't know exactly what it's doing or it's not a person making those decisions and so no one can be held liable, they are saying, well, you created the algorithm, you know how it's going to operate, and so you have actual direct knowledge, which then makes you liable. And this really is the key to the entire bill, because we're going to get into some of the legal ramifications in a minute. But lawmakers, in order to pass this bill and push it forward, really have to show that the algorithm pushing out the content is an independent, separate act from the person who is posting the content. So they know that social media companies can't be liable for something that they didn't say or they didn't post. That's not how it works. But they could be liable under this bill for what they promote if they know that their algorithm is designed to promote or market or push out content that is harmful, violent, or any of the things that they have outlined in this bill. So then the question quickly becomes, is this legal? Is this constitutional under the First Amendment? Do we have any legal precedent set around this? This is not the first time that we see a bill trying to curb the influences, effects, and actions of social media. So surely this must have come up before. And what have court rulings been on this topic? There is so much legal precedent in this area. And so that also means that there are many legal challenges directly to this bill. And so I just want to walk through some of the major red flags or problems that start to just come up when you start thinking about the ramifications of a bill like this. The first problem is that the basic principle of this bill is that social media companies should suppress speech that is considered harmful or hateful by the California government. So really, California is the one who is going to set the standard of what is harmful rhetoric. And they believe that any speech that is out there that doesn't align with what they think is acceptable rhetoric should then be suppressed. Because really, when you think about it, if you are saying that a social media company's algorithm cannot push out certain content, then the only other option is to suppress that content. There's no in between. You either allow the content to reach the users who it is intended to reach based on their activity and based on how the algorithm works, or you have to specifically make sure that the algorithm is not promoting that sort of speech, which then in turn would be suppression because it's not being pushed out to the audiences that it normally would be. But to suppress speech that you don't like is fundamentally un-American. That is completely against what we do here in America and completely against the First Amendment. But now you might be thinking, well, we just said that not all speech is protected. And so maybe this bill is only talking about those direct threats. Shouldn't social media platforms make sure that they are taking those down or that they are dealing with those threats? But here's the problem. Social media companies already have standards for taking down things that are harassing, taking down things that are direct threats. They already agree with the government that not all speech is free, and so that speech shouldn't be allowed on their platforms. This bill is introducing a whole new level of liability and gray area toward harmful rhetoric. And that rhetoric really isn't clearly defined. Even when you look at the examples that they're citing, like I mentioned earlier, they're citing the LGBTQ disinformation. No one knows what that means. What does that mean? Does that mean that if you say that a man is not a woman and that there are two genders, that is harmful rhetoric or that's disinformation? And therefore, if a social media company promotes that or if the algorithm pushes that content out to other users who maybe have the same belief, that now they're held liable for that because California sees that as harmful? It's really undefined. So suddenly we're giving the government the power to decide what type of speech should be free and which type shouldn't be free. And that is not correct. We should never be doing that. If you are going to put a law in place that will enact $1 million fines each time that it is violated, you had better be crystal clear on what the standards for speech really are. But this bill is not clear. And the reason I say this is because we have seen this vagueness lead to censorship in the past. In fact, just this past month, we saw that Google admitted that under the Biden administration, YouTube was told and pressured to take down content that didn't violate its hateful speech standards. It didn't violate any of the standards of conduct that YouTube has in place, but it was just speech that the Biden administration did not like. And so as a result, there were a lot of users who were demonetized, deplatformed, the algorithm wouldn't push out their content, and now they are actually suing to rightfully be reinstated or to receive rewards and compensation for the time that they lost and the money that they lost under that suppression tactic that was used by the administration. So these things are happening. And You really can't blame social media companies. I mean, you can. Everybody has license and agency. But again, if they are facing down the barrel of $1 million fines, then you better believe that companies are going to be really restrictive. They're going to do anything that they can to make sure that they're not getting into legal battles where they have to constantly defend themselves, taking the reputational damage and hits in the media of having all of these battles, and then potentially paying millions of dollars in fines because California determined that they didn't do enough to actively suppress voices that the government doesn't agree with. So suddenly you're going to end up in an environment where maybe the social media company doesn't even really care that you're posting certain things, but they have to actively suppress it or else they're going to be in trouble with the California legislature. And this principle of vagueness really has legal precedent around this. There's been actual court cases around similar other laws or bills. So if we take, for instance, the 1972 case of Grayned versus City of Rockford, the City of Rockford, Illinois, put an anti-picketing ordinance in place because there were certain protests and demonstrations that were happening after school, and they wanted to suppress a lot of those protests. And so what they did is that they said that you couldn't go out and picket and you couldn't say certain things. But the Supreme Court actually struck that down because they said that it was too vague. They just said that it wasn't clear enough what was speech that wasn't allowed in a certain case, what you couldn't say or do or picket for under the ordinance, and that vagueness would then lead to curbing people's First Amendment rights to free speech in an effort to avoid legal troubles or fines from the city. The First Amendment requires clear and expressly defined laws when it comes to restricting or prohibiting certain content. And any laws that haven't been clear, that have been overly vague in the past, have been ruled under legal precedent to violate the First Amendment of the Constitution. And this is even more important in our culture and society today, where just rhetoric that people don't agree with is automatically seen as hateful, harmful, and violent. We see it constantly across social media, but also just in political discourse, that if you say something that someone else disagrees with, that they automatically feel attacked by your worldview, that they say that that makes you hateful, that that makes you anti-LGBTQ, if you personally believe that marriage is between a man and a woman. And you might have never said that you hate LGBTQ people. You might have never indicated that. You might not believe that. But because you simply disagree with them, now you're seen as violent. That rhetoric becomes violent. And so it has to be, again, crystal clear of what harmful rhetoric really is. Because if we're just letting the state government decide that, it's going to be all over the place, and it is going to definitely limit free expression that we are guaranteed by our federal constitution. But that's just being vague. And it's funny because beyond being vague, there are so many other legal challenges and problems that this bill is bumping up against. The main one being Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. You may have heard of this. This is pretty popular whenever we're talking about free speech issues. But basically, this section of this act says that online platforms for content posted by third parties are not held liable as a publisher or speaker of that user-generated content. So in other words, if someone does post something on a social media platform like YouTube, Reddit, Instagram, whatnot, that does fall under a threat or harassment or discrimination, then the platform itself can't be held liable for that because it didn't say it. The person can be held liable. The person can absolutely incur consequences for that, and their posts can be taken down under certain guidelines that are set by social media companies. But the social media platform itself is not liable because it didn't write it. It's not the active speaker of the speech. And there's a ton of case law around Section 230 as well, including specifically regarding algorithms, because this bill really speaks to the algorithm and what it pushes out. And so in 2019, there was a court case called Force versus Facebook. And this is when the Second Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that Section 230 shields platforms from liability even when algorithms recommend user content. And really the argument is that an algorithm is a neutral tool that works based off of user inputs. And so really it's just a system that you are setting up, and it is going to respond to user inputs in order to recommend content that it thinks matches the activity of the user. But it's not active editorial judgment. And so because Section 230 is federal law and because federal law preempts state law, it's already seeming like if SB 771 is passed, that it will still incur a lot of these legal challenges because it just does not seem to match with the precedent that we have set in our country when it comes to trying to regulate social media or other free speech platforms. These legal questions are incredibly important because free speech is incredibly important. And with that, it is also important to have the freedom to live well. And that is why you should definitely check out We Heart Nutrition. We Heart Nutrition is a family-run company that works to give you super high quality research-backed supplements with no fillers or synthetic additives. They have clinically backed ingredients. They have third-party testing for purity and potency. They have sustainably sourced ingredients, and it is all formulated by nutritionists right here in the United States. It is so important, more important than ever, that you are taking care of your health and that your loved ones are taking care of their health. And so We Heart Nutrition has great supplements for both men and women in all phases of life. But what really sets them apart is their commitment to giving back. They're not just here to sell supplements, they also want to support the values that they genuinely believe. And one of those values is to support life in every way possible. And so 10% of their sales go directly towards supporting pro-life pregnancy resource centers across the United States. So that you know when you buy products from them, that you are also supporting a mission and values that align directly with your values and your beliefs as well. They are pro-baby, pro-life, pro-mom, and American-owned, which really doesn't get better than that, and you should definitely support them over other companies who do not agree with your values. So if you are looking for a supplement company that is committed to quality and integrity, but also to support the values that you believe and want to champion in the marketplace, then you should go check them out. You can use my code TessAbraham at checkout to get 20% off your order, or you can shop through the link below. Go check them out today and use my code TessAbraham to get 20% off and to support the show. But moving beyond the question of legality, there's also another pressing question, which is harmful rhetoric really an issue that needs to be addressed through legislation? And is legislation like SB 771 the most effective way to help reduce it? And to both questions, I would answer emphatically no. Like I mentioned before, civil rights laws already speak to what type of speech is protected and what is not protected. We don't need additional laws that now just set up social media companies as the ones who have to police certain types of speech. That just creates a really dangerous environment where unelected officials are the ones who are making decisions behind the scenes based on the algorithm of what type of speech is going to be promoted and what type is going to be censored. And then it also puts a lot of power in the hands of the California government in terms of defining that type of rhetoric. And so if you don't align with the California government, if you're someone who has values that are very different than the policies that have been passed by our state, you could be specifically targeted by this type of bill or type of law, because again, social media companies want to make sure that they are avoiding the wrath of the government and of law enforcement. So it's just a really dangerous system, and it's definitely something that we should not be giving them so much power to control. But really, an even bigger issue is that this type of legislation does not address the root causes of the problems that legislators are saying that they want to solve. California legislators are trying to claim that they want to solve the problem of hateful or harmful rhetoric, but they're not willing to define what that rhetoric is, to engage with that definition to see if it's even accurate or something that they need to be legislating, and then to make sure that their law would actually reduce it. Because here's the thing, harmful rhetoric is not just anything that you disagree with. Just because someone disagrees with you does not mean that they hate you. It does not mean that they are being violent toward you. And it does not mean that they do not have a right to say it. We should not be teaching our future generations that any speech that they hear that goes against their worldview or something that they believe is harmful and that it should just be outlawed. And so then the solution is to not just create more and more laws that continue to restrict speech again and again that the legislators who are putting the law in place just don't like. The real solution to the question of speech and to the question of rhetoric is to empower young people specifically, as well as just everyone, to be able to speak out and to have open debate and dialogue. Dialogue that is respectful, but that can also be strong, where people can hold to their values and speak their mind and say what they believe, while also remaining respectful enough to listen to the other side as well, without calling them names, without trying to shut them down, and certainly without trying to outlaw their right to say it. We have completely lost the art to open debate in our society, passionate debate. The founding fathers debated openly and passionately about the things that they believed in the way that they wanted the country to be run. And we've lost that today. So we need to regain that, help people be able to engage in conversation in a way that is not overly emotional, where there is not anger immediately rising up when someone disagrees with you, but where there is curiosity, where there's interest to learn different viewpoints and interest to try to persuade someone actively to your side and winsomely, because at the end of the day, you want them to be on the same page as you. People who disagree with you are not your enemy. They are just people who need to be persuaded of why you think that they are wrong. And then you need to have the respect to listen to the other side as well. And so really, the solution, again, is not outlawing speech, but it's cultivating community. It's teaching each other to see one another as human beings who are more than just our political views, more than just our ideas on policies or other things that affect our government. We're so much more than that as people. And if we see each other as people, then we cultivate a society where we're able to talk about these ideas openly, and there is less sort of violence or threats or harassment or anything on social media, because we all know at the end of the day, this is one small part of each of us, and we can disagree passionately on it, and then we can turn around and agree on other things. And so that is precisely why SB 771 should concern us, because instead of taking the approach to teach people how to talk to one another, how to grow together, and how to continue cultivating an open environment of dialogue between one another to really understand each other, instead it's just trying to hand over control to the government and trying to force down fines on social media companies that platform speech that it doesn't like. That is just not the solution, and that's not the way that we should want our society to operate or continue to move towards in the future. So, is California really committed to free speech, or is it just committed to speech that it likes? I guess we will find out when we see what Governor Newsom does with this bill in the next few weeks. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I hope it was helpful for you as you navigate life in our state and that you even learned something new. Please spread the word and share this show with your friends, family, and fellow Californians. And I'll see you back here next week for another episode of the California Conversation.